Brothers, I am so excited for this opportunity for all of us to be together and to just share a very powerful and poignant story of God's healing in a particular family. I think all of us we understand the brokenness that all of us have in married life and family life. But I want to introduce you to John and Colleen Duggan of Glenville, Pennsylvania. And I'm going to just kind of let it start with that. And Colleen, let's go ladies first. Would you just introduce us a little bit to your family and you and John, and take us back a little bit, and then we're going to share your story and the Lord's healing and his work in your lives.
Sure. Well, John and I met when we were in graduate school at the University of Notre Dame. I had been a student at St. Mary's, the all-women's college across the street, where I studied psychology and theology. I double majored. And I went to Catholic school most of my life, but when I was in college and away from my family, my faith really became something I embraced. It was just such a grace-filled time. I remember reading Humanae Vitae when I was a sophomore. It was my second semester, my first year in college, for an ethics class. And I remember reading just about how, marriage was a reflection of the Trinity, and just sitting in the basement of my dorm room thinking, oh my gosh, the church is smart. They know stuff. And I was so convicted in that moment, which was just a grace. It wasn't anything really, just from reading the documents of the church. I grew in my conviction to really embrace my faith and to live out my faith when I got married. I remember that moment was a really definitive moment of like, I will live this. I will live the church's teachings on sexual ethics in my marriage, and I will find a Catholic man to do it with me. And then John and I were in a graduate school program for Catholic educators. He had come from Boston College, and we met, and we were assigned to the same area of the country to teach for our practicum. And we taught at rival high schools, and we were friends first, and eventually we started dating. So, and then we had kids fast and furious.
You have seven children.
7 children, yes, spanning ages 5 months to 18 years old.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, John, why don't you pick it up from here? We're going to get into the story a little bit. So you have this marriage, you're starting to have children. I know you're now in the business world, but talk to me about your marriage, John, and some of the pressures that you were going under, and what began to happen. Help us understand that.
Sure. So I fell in love with I grew up as a Catholic, altar boy, from a big family, a big Catholic family, and fell in love with Colleen, fell in love with her passion for the church as well, and the church's teachings. And I read all the encyclicals as well, and fell in love with all of them and tried to live them out. But what I realized is that I always struggled with purity ever since a young man, and especially when things were it was a lot of pressure. And I always confessed it in the confessional. But one thing I never really did is really tell Colleen a lot about it. I just felt ashamed of it. And we continued to develop in our marriage and have more children, and took on jobs with greater roles of responsibility, if that makes sense. And basically got to a point where I turned to pornography. As in pornography for me was a more progressive thing, where things started out where I was looking at videos on like YouTube and things like that, in pressured moments and moments to try to cope with some of the pressures of life. And that I'm articulating that now. I don't even know if I could have articulated it back then. I almost barely, which sounds so dysfunctional, but I almost didn't even admitted to myself what I was even doing. And my life was so compartmentalized that I almost barely admitted what I did until I got to the confessional line. And then I had to face what I had done. But things started to progress over time, and the pornography got and it it developed from YouTube into full-blown pornography, and I struggled with it. I struggled with it on my own. I didn't bring it to anybody. I didn't bring it to any close friends, and I didn't bring it to Colleen. I just kept trying to struggle on my own, and I hated what I was doing, and I hid what I was doing because I was so ashamed of it. Um, and that's
I want to stop there for a minute. I'm obviously grateful for your courage and both of you willing to share this part of your journey and your marriage and your life. But I'm really hearing some things that I think all of us as men that are listening, can relate to. This notion that when we're under pressure as husbands, fathers, providers, the pressure often we release the pressure in different ways. For you it was pornography, and for others it's alcohol or drugs, affairs. So there's many ways that I think Satan tempts men to deal with the pressure they're under in this life in obviously very inappropriate ways. And I think there's probably a lot of guys so far that are nodding their head. They either relate directly to what you shared so far, or they know that in their own life it was some other vice, some other addiction that they struggled with as well. So I think as hard as this is, you're into an area where we understand as men what you're sharing. Maybe before we come back to you, I mean, Colleen, it's also not surprising, maybe it's not surprising to you, Colleen, that men don't share these things very well. And so here you were living family life with John and the children and not aware of this at all. Is that right?
Not aware. And in fact, I came from a home where there was every addiction but pornography. So drugs, drinking, food, if there's a book about in AA that has a branch, we've got family there. And so I asked and I watched, and I was vicious about the vicious is a hard word, but I was really direct. Like, I will not live with addiction. I don't want alcoholism. I didn't want any of that. I lived very purely myself. And look, one thing I will say is it's not just men who struggle with addictions. My drug of choice would be alcohol. And I figured out early on that was not going to be something that I could dance with, because that would be right where I would go. So it's not that I don't have, and even to this day, a compassion for the pornography that John ended up using, as it progressed. It was the double life. It was the hypocrisy. It was the hiddenness. It was all the behaviors that came from, when someone's drunk on the couch with a 12-pack, even if you're 6 years old, you can name it. You can name the problem. And this just made me feel crazy, because I thought, we look the part. We were in the first row at Mass on Sunday, and I was living the church's teachings on Sunday. Again, not perfectly. I'm not a saint, and I have great compassion for anyone who struggles with the flesh like I do, but the double-edged sword for me, and I think this is the hard thing about pornography, is the hidden nature of it. Makes it for me, it was when the truth came out, which came out after a pretty large fight that we had. And I asked John to take, after some prayer, I had been in adoration, had gone to Mass, had come home, was in prayer all morning. And I said, I think you need a few days to take some time. And we had been married, 17 years at that point. You need to, or maybe 60, I don't know. You need to take some time. And he was packing his bag, and I was prompted to ask, is there anything I need to know about sexual sin? Which I had never asked him before in all those years. And that was when the truth came out. And for me, when I learned the truth after 17 years of, hey, you want to go to counseling with me? Hey, I'm going to that therapist. I was in 12-step meetings myself for codependency. I was working my stuff because I have stuff, a lot of it. And there was a lot of resistance, a lot of reticence. And so when the truth came out, I was done. I was like, you got to go. This is over. And we had, at the time, we had 6 kids. And so he moved out, and it ended up being a 6-month separation. And before I would really even talk to him, and some of the men are probably like, holy cow, that's so harsh. But what I want to convey is that I was someone who had really given marriage a go. And I'm not perfect, but because of my background with so much addiction, that, even if John had come to me earlier and said, hey, this is happening, I don't think I would have handled it very well. But because it was so hidden, it was really, I didn't know if there was any coming back from it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Of course it makes sense. And I think, all of us listening can appreciate this position that both of you are in at this point. So let's go back to John. Colleen has shared kind of, it came out, she learned and understood. Maybe pick up from there, John. What did you have to begin to, how did you respond? Here you are separated now, physically separated. Talk about that time and what the Lord was doing in your heart. What did you sense? What was starting to happen or not happen at that point?
Sure. I wish I could say that, that I was so remorseful, and I wish I could say that I was so tenderhearted to Colleen at that point, because she had been someone who tried so hard in our marriage, and had really been someone who was very self-aware of herself, and had really read tons of books about
So many books.
So many books.
On my tombstone, they're going to put, she thought she could find the answers to problems of life in books.
She was working on herself with just this chisel, right? And I wish I could have I could share with you today, Matt, that I was tenderhearted, and I realized that I just needed to amend my ways. And I knew that pornography was wrong. I hated it. I've never looked back from that day, but those first couple of months, I realized that my heart was so hard. I actually found justification in what I was doing because of the resentments that I was holding on that had built up over years, just in married life and in our friendship, and just in the hard things that happen in life sometimes. And I found that justification, so I had to unravel that, and that was a hard process. And
talk about that a little bit. How did that unraveling happen? What were the resources, and how did you do that?
I started going back to, what are the resources out there? I started, looking on the internet, Googling, and realizing, it was very humbling because there are resources out there. And I realized that I had read a book about 5 or 6 years earlier called Every Man's Battle. It's a Christian book. And it was one of the books that I found pretty helpful. And then that dovetailed into digging into those 2 guys. And I realized that there was a men's conference, and this is during COVID. They were having a virtual conference. It was like a 10, 11 hour long Zoom call, workshop type deal. And I found it on my own, but then Colleen found it for me.
Like the same day.
Same day or something like that. It was just one of these like God things. And attending that began the healing process for me.
Talk about this is powerful. I'm aware of that book. I think a lot of us as men have heard of that book, or talk about how Christ, the sacraments, the church, how did you begin to see healing through our Lord and his sacraments and through the church directly?
Sure. I can tell you that, you know, I remained faithful to the Church's sacraments. I went to confession, but, you know, and I don't know how you'll feel about this, but one of the things that I had to forgive was that going to confession, bringing my sin to confession, and I did every single time, without fail. My struggle was that I knew I was forgiven, but how was that going to change me and my behavior? That's where there was a gap between, I know that intellectually and theologically this is wrong. I knew that I had to go to confession, and I humbly confessed, and I always did my penance that the priest told me to do. But at the same time, there was a gap between how, just the word how do I stop doing this? And that's where I struggled, and I found a gap. You know, the church has these huge pillars of truth, but in between those pillars, it was like, how do I live today? How do I live the next 24 hours?
Yeah.
How do I live the next 48, the next 72, the next couple of weeks, moving away from this?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I'm sure. Go ahead, Colleen.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that I also had to forget, you know, we are a family that was bringing the kids weekly, definitely bi-monthly, to confession. And, you know, John was told over the years, your sin is, you know, even though intellectually he knew, we are born and raised Catholic. We know the church's teachings, but he had a priest say, it's venial now, you can receive communion. And so I never knew. If John had been abstaining from communion, I would have known, okay, there's a problem. But so I also have had a struggle around, I mean, we still are faithful to the church. We still are receiving the sac. We've not left. We're not, you know, but there's been an undoing of, because I thought you go to the sacraments, you get healed. And yes, the sacraments led us to healing 100%. But we had to go step out and look for, because we had this spiritual support, but we did not have the human support that we needed. And, you know, the priest, you know, I had said to John, I might get choked up here, but even if the priest had said, and again, not blaming the priest, this, you know, the church has been riddled with sexual scandal. We're all affected. Okay. So I'm not blaming, but even if a priest had said, hey, you know, if there's some, you know, questions like, you ever put a hand through the wall? You ever kick the dog? You ever feel like hitting a kid? If there had been questions like that, you know, to kind of say, you know, this goes beyond what I can do for you here in the confessional, and not spiritually, but humanly. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. Okay. And I think God is, in his love, he gives us the grace in the sacraments, but we have to cooperate with that grace. And that means that we have to find and be a part of the healing and find the resources that enable us to be healed. So John, let's go to that.
Shame too, like shame connected with the sin. This is why porn is so hard, or masturbation, or whatever, fantasy, whatever it is, because there's so much shame associated with it, that once you confess it, who wants to go tell their men's group, you know, I fell this weekend, what do I do?
Yeah.
Sorry.
John, there's a lot of men that are watching this right now that are in the middle of this struggle, or they're at the beginning, or they're far into it. So we obviously know and understand how important the grace of the sacraments is, and where else, as you cooperated with that grace, give us what are the things that have been essential to your healing and this journey that you're on now of recovery and healing? What would you say to men that they should be thinking about doing to really, as you said, to kind of cover that gap and to really address how. Let's talk about that.
The how is finding, there are resources out there, first of all, finding a meeting or a conference or a group of men that are safe, that, you know, are all struggling with the same thing and are not going to be sharing what, you know, what goes on, or criticizing you in any way, because it's in that safe space that it can become a sacred space of healing, and men can share their struggles, and men can, like myself, could realize, you know, I'm not alone, and that there's other guys that are good guys, that these are, you know, are good normal guys that are like me, you know, not that I'm normal, I'm very dysfunctional or something like that, but you know, that want to be better and that hate what they're doing and want to be good Christian Catholic guys that are family guys that can get help. So like Every Man's Battle has a monthly conference that they offer. It's a Christian thing. There are groups kind of similar to AA that you could call in anonymously and be on a teleconference. I was on a teleconference every single day for those first couple months. So I was trying to get my feet on the ground and being able to stay pure and share daily struggles. So those are some of the big things. And then we found this group that was for the both of us. That was
one of the things that I think with having done 12-step work that can be something to just watch for is that the 12-step lingo can kind of keep the spat. This is a marital problem. It is a personal sin, but it becomes a marital problem. The most painful part of all of this for me was not pornography, was not other women, was not. The most painful part for me were the behaviors that came with it: gaslighting, lying, denying, defensiveness. And I think, I'm not saying all men are like that, but I think defensiveness and humility is a skill, you know, it's something you have to grow in. I think all humans struggle with that, but you throw porn into the mix and you've got a special secret sauce of pride. And so we were able to, through God, it was God, because when John and I were separated, I was in my bed praying and crying. I didn't know how this was my life. I didn't know how we got here. And God led us to a program that helps to heal the marriage. And it was a Christian-based program. I want to write all the bishops and say, please, would you just slap a label that it's Catholic approved on it, because it helped us. I joke with the people in charge all the time, as I tell all my friends that are Catholic, like, if you guys want to be in it, this is this place will help you.
And what's the name of that program?
Redemptive Living. And he wrote the guy who ran John's Every Man's Battle workshop. His name was Jason Martinkus, and he wrote a book called Worthy of Her Trust. And we both read that early in recovery. And when we had our intake call, he agreed to work with us. And we got a marriage coach. We'd done everything else, therapy and we had a coach, and the coaching was so practical and helpful. And we didn't get into some of those tit for tats that we would on a therapy couch. It was like, dude, are we going to solve this problem today? And if so, let's go, and we needed that. Like I call the person who worked with us. He was one of the guys that puts on the mask and runs into the burning building. Because I sat on that guy, I sat on Zoom calls with him, and I'm like, I'm out. I'm divorcing this guy. I mean, we was just, what I'm trying to tell you is he saw us at our absolute rawest, worst. He's the godfather of our baby, which we would never even have had this person not walked with us and loved John and loved me. And we don't have anything figured out really, except that we're still a mess and we want to live godly lives, and we love each other. We love our family, and God has called us to holiness, and we're going to be working on this for the rest of our lives.
I will make one correction to what you said,
Okay.
which is one thing that I do have figured out is basically eliminating masturbation and pornography from my life.
Yeah, he has that.
And this group helps you to diagnose exactly the trigger points of what would lead you 10 steps before you would even do that.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
It was all the emotional, psycho-emotional things that we both needed, but especially John.
Yeah.
You know, to have another man look at him and love him and walk with him talk about truth and love. I mean, there were times that the guy that we worked with, who I love like a brother, you know, he did not cut John a break. And I think you would say you probably needed that, but it was painful in the moment.
Yeah.
And
he was a cross between, you know, my brother walking alongside of me and the coach just kicking my butt in front of me. He was a little bit of both.
I love that. I think guys can relate to that. Well, John, I want you to give you kind of the last word here. This has been so beautiful, and you've opened hearts, and we have so much compassion for you both, but we also have so much more understanding for any of us that are dealing with this in any way. It's just you've given such hope. So, John, maybe the last word from you. Talk about, the hope that we can have, that men that are struggling with this can get through this. Give us some hope, and then we'll let you two get on your way, and we'll just be so thankful. But John, take the last word here.
Sure. I mean, the hope I would share is that if any guy on this call is like me, and who hated what they were doing, they hated being at mass knowing that they were not pure, who just was afraid of the secret coming out, that there is hope because there's a way out. There's a way out of eliminating this in your life. And don't get me wrong, it's pulling a weed that is deep, goes all the way back to probably, my childhood and theirs, of all the fears and weaknesses that they have. But at the same time, there's so much hope and life on the other side. I mean, right here, I don't know if you can see this, but this is the webcam of Caleb Joshua, who's our baby who was born after this all came out.
After our reconciliation.
And I can't tell you enough how it's really transformed
our family,
my life, our marriage, our family. And my son, he's 18. He did a senior thesis on the evils of pornography. And I couldn't have been a prouder father sitting in that audience when he delivered.
What a beautiful, that your little baby boy is such a beautiful sign of redemptive love, of mercy that blesses and that heals. And I just want to thank both of you, your courage, the great humility and love that you have for all of us, that you've become public with your journey in this aspect of life. So many men and women, marriages probably deal with this in very hidden, private ways, and you've felt a call to come out and help families across the country with this kind of ministry. So God bless you. We're praying for both of you, continued healing, continued joy on this path of healing. Thank you for being with us. And men, this is just an opportunity for us all to listen and learn and open our hearts. If any of the men watching this are struggling, there's resources that John and Carolyn have mentioned, Colleen have mentioned, and we also can provide those resources for you as well. Colleen and John, God bless you. Thank you for the time you spent with us today, and we're just very humble and very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity.
if anyone needs emails, if they, if someone feels convicted, they can feel free to reach out to John or me if any of the wives are looking for support. We're not trained, we're not professional, but we can point people in directions.
We'll
Gladly.
make those available. God bless you too. Thanks.
Thank you.